I wanted to start this off with breaking down what I think to be the highlights in Elon Musk's leaked meeting with the employees of Twitter, the Zoom meeting that he had with an employee of Twitter, where they were effectively interviewing Elon Musk on his anticipated purchase of Twitter. And I put together the three highlights, and I put it together as a video, and then I accidentally published it. So anybody who got a video from Viva Clips this morning that was initially entitled June 20, 2022, those were the three highlights from the interview that I want to walk through now, just to highlight what I think are the three most important elements of that leaked Zoom meeting, above and beyond, or I guess secondary to the fact that the Zoom meeting was leaked itself. Somehow, gosh darn, love or hate Project Veritas, although I think you have to love them more than you hate them. Give them credit for getting, it's encouraging. In as much as the world seems like it's going bat plop crazy. What's it? Ghana? What was the bat poo from Ace Ventura Part 2? In as much as the world sometimes feels like it's going bat plop crazy, the fact that there are people out there who are sufficiently frustrated, they don't feel comfortable to say it publicly, but they feel compelled to do something about it confidentially or anonymously, should be encouraging for everyone. So somehow, Project Veritas gets the link to the meeting, gets the entire it was a 54-minute interview, unedited, publishes it. And it was fun to watch. It's fun to watch people when they don't know that they're going to be watched by the entire world. But from my perspective, it's also just fun watching people in these corporate settings. My major first takeaway from all of this, I cannot stand the environment. I cannot stand the pseudo politeness of everybody has to be on their best behavior. They have to thank everyone for their time. I don't know if it makes me a jerk or just a cranky old man. I cannot stand the pseudo pretentious, artificial, saccharine politeness of all these meetings. People are not loose and natural, although Elon is pretty close to loose and natural. Everybody's prim and proper, and they're so polite. They've got to thank everyone for their time and phrase their questions nicely and polite. Anyhow, it might be one of the reasons why I could not stand the political environment of the big law firm. But the cranky old man I got in the fakery, it makes me like, just be real. Just be real. Like, it's just a conversation. You don't have to say thank you. Look, thank you for your time. Thanks for being here. Like watching the congressional hearings. My God, is it a circle pat on the back of pomposity and self-gratifying? So important. Anyway, so getting past that, getting past cranky pants, realist fakery, platitudes can be very annoying. Getting past that, the three highlights that I took away from that leaked meeting, above and beyond, kudos for Project Veritas for getting it. Everyone out there, remember, govern yourself as though you are always being recorded secretly for public disclosure. If you do that, you'll keep your schmeckle in your pants when you should. You'll be nice when you should. And you might actually just stop and reflect, even if I'm not being recorded by a proverbial eye in the sky, we are all being observed by a cosmic eye in the sky. And I'm not saying God in a big G sense. I'm just saying karma, cosmos, or just living with dignity, even if nobody is, in fact, always watching us. Okay. So let's bring this in because, sorry, I should have probably told you, Taylor Silverman is coming in at 12:30. I wanted to make sure to get the crowd ready, warmed up before she comes in. And I wanted to cover this because it does, in fact, dovetail, if that's the word, into the subject matter of the day. Inclusivity. Oh, my back hurts. Okay, let's do this here. Let's do this. The three highlights are here, unedited, and I accidentally published it, so now I'm just going to use it as my notes guideline, starting from the beginning. I think these are in chronological order that they occurred in the meeting, but I was editing it off my iPhone, so it's possible I might have they might not be in the right sequence, but I think they are. Highlight number one, which I think is very important.
And as we think about, obviously, the product and the service and serving customers all around the world, clearly it's critical and existential for us to serve diverse communities and all people, as you said earlier. So inclusion and diversity is obviously core and essential to our work at Twitter, both our employees and the customers that we serve. You've been vocal on a variety of different topics and issues that relate to inclusion and diversity. Can you talk about both your views and also your commitment to creating a diverse and inclusive workplace and also a service where everyone can feel included and safe?
Do you understand, by the way, they talk about diversity and inclusiveness. This is what drives me nuts. And if I were in Elon's shoes, which I'm not, and maybe there's a reason for which I'm not in Elon's shoes, maybe it's because I would have said this. You talk about diversity and inclusion, and it seems you include all forms of diversity and inclusion, except for the diversity and inclusion of ideology, differing political ideology. If one were to look at an environment, let me remove this for a second. If one were to look at an environment and say or see, oh, it seems to be 90% male. It seems to be 90% white. It seems to be 90% anything. You would say, there's a diversity problem here by their own standards. You would say, there's a diversity problem here. We only seem to have white people. We only seem to have men, and that's not very diverse. Well, why does diversity and inclusion, according to this individual who works for Twitter and is interviewing Elon Musk, not include ideological diversity and inclusion? If I look at Twitter, and it just so happens that it is 90% plus leftist-leaning ideology, is there not absence of diversity and inclusion for, say, conservative perspectives, for, say, libertarian perspectives? Why is it that this diversity and inclusion only includes the most easily objectifiable of traits of diversity and inclusion? Why is that? And even among the diversity and inclusion that they have, okay, so it's not 90% male, it's not 90% white, it's diverse and inclusive, except as relates to ideology. What impact do you think that has, Madam Interviewer, with respect to the product and the environment that you put out and host? But alas, I'm not Elon. He is not me, and I'm not worth $100 billion. I'm a cranky realist in a basement talking to everyone else out there. Let's hear what his answer is, though.
Yeah, I mean, well, to be clear, if everyone talks about I said about Twitter as a whole, like there's 8 billion people in the world. There's sort of, I'm told there's 200 million, daily users of Twitter. That's a 7.8 billion person gap. So I think we really want to have, I don't know, at least 1 billion people on Twitter, maybe more. As many people as we can possibly get on Twitter. So that, I think, is the most inclusive definition of inclusiveness. It's like all humans. So, that's important.
Pause it there, actually. Pause it there. He might have the more diplomatic way of saying it, and he might be subtly highlighting the problem. Well, you only have 200 million people using the platform. There's 8 billion, let's say 8 billion people out there. We want to have as many people as possible. Rubbing it in her face that if you had 1 billion people, chances are you'd have 200 to 300 million people whose ideologies don't align with your own. As if to rub it in her face to say, well, when she says, well, we want to make people feel safe. And so to make people feel safe, we want diversity and inclusion, except as relates to ideas and politics and philosophies that make some people feel unsafe. Those have to be excluded for the purposes of inclusion. Maybe Elon is trying to bring out that point, and maybe he's doing it more eloquently than I would have, in a manner that will receive a better response than I would have. I would have just taken it one step further and say, yeah, you want 1 billion people and you want diverse thoughts, diverse opinions. That is diversity and inclusion, not just token aspects of people's identity that you can reduce to color, religion, and gender. You want diversity of thought, and that is probably the most important type of diversity and inclusion, not excluding people based on their thought. But okay, maybe it's written into what Elon says, but it's an important point. Get as many people on it. It can't be more inclusive than everyone. Of course, they would respond and say, well, some people make us feel unsafe, so we need to exclude in the name of inclusion. That's the absurdity of the position. I'd like to hear them say it, though.
From a company standpoint, I believe in a sort of strict meritocracy. So whenever, whoever's doing great work, great, they get more responsibility and authority, and that's that.
That was part one. A strict meritocracy. Can you hear the collective heads exploding of the people at this platform on Twitter who, according to other videos leaked by Project Veritas, treat Twitter like effectively a communist entity that doesn't have to worry about profits, doesn't have to worry about bottom line, is ideologically driven. You succeed on meritocracy, that entire part of the equation gets destroyed. You don't put out a good product. You don't work well. You don't actually do what you're supposed to do in a company. You will not succeed. You might actually get fired. Imagine that. You might actually get fired if you don't do well what you're there to do well. Meritocracy. The greatest threat to a great many people. It's the greatest threat to Canadian media. Meritocracy. Those who succeed on their own merit deserve to succeed on their own merit. CBC doesn't like that. Canadian media doesn't like that. And that is why they need government assistance, government censorship, government regulation to succeed, because they would otherwise fail on a meritocracy. And a lot of people on social media want the same thing. If it were diversity of thought and diversity of philosophy, those that would succeed would be, in theory, the ones that succeed on their own merits. But there's a reason why they have to suppress, censor, and kick off platforms. And it's not always because of alleged community guidelines violations.
I wanted to talk about content moderation, go back to a number of the things that you said earlier. So this is one I'll take verbatim. So you've spoken a lot about the importance of free speech. Let's start with the US, where we have a strong tradition around this. And you touched on this earlier. A lot of what's called lawful but awful speech is allowed here in the United States, right? Animal abuse, footage, doxing, videos of sexual violence, etc. So allowing this type of content obviously could cause harm and make Twitter unusable for the broad audience that you're trying to reach. Excuse
me, ma'am. Not to be rude. First of all, none of the three things you just said are awful but lawful. They're just unlawful. Period. Some people argue over the doxing. Doxing's not unlawful. Public disclosure of a private fact is unlawful. What else was I going to say? Targeted harassment is unlawful. So when you say X lives at Y, public disclosure of a private fact and targeted harassment, it is unlawful. The first and the third are obviously unlawful. So bad examples of awful but lawful. How about you use awful but lawful in the sense that everyone understands it, which is relating to the topic that we're going to broach today. But she takes these examples and says, you got to make everyone feel safe. It would make it unusable. Does she not know what's on Twitter right now as it stands? I was listening to an episode of Howard Stern. I'm not even going to mention what it was. This was a long time ago. This was 2 years ago. And Howard Stern mentioned an individual's Twitter handle. And I went to it. And I didn't realize that this stuff was on Twitter. I know that there's other stuff on Twitter that people have sued for the removal of, and Twitter doesn't remove it. So talk about awful but lawful when it's actually just unlawful, and Twitter itself doesn't want to take it down for whatever the reason. There's nasty stuff. I mean, if you're into it, all the better. Consenting adults, do whatever you want, so long as it doesn't affect anybody else. But for her to pretend that Twitter's some pristine entity where it's all just daisies and kittens, I can give you some handles on Twitter. It's not daisies and kittens. Anyways, but moving on.
What is your approach to this type of content that's sort of legal but problematic as it relates to people actually using the service? How do you think about this tension?
As I said earlier, really, I think we should allow people to say what they want, post what they want within the bounds of the law. But that's different from them being able to reach people who don't want to be reached with that content. So if that content is offensive, then to people, those people will simply stop using Twitter.
Diversity is
what I just
as I said earlier,
Ding, 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 Elon. And ding, 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 everyone else out there. I don't use the word snowflake, but other people would in this context. If you don't like Dave Chappelle, don't watch the Netflix special. If you find something offensive, don't watch it. The idea that someone could say, I find it offensive that you're having this conversation with someone else, you are no longer living your own life for yourself. You're telling me how to live mine, and your freedom ends where mine begins. So ding, ding, ding. Sign up for Twitter. I don't want to see XYZ. Boom. It won't come to you. Leave it alone. Now, if it's people breaking the law, if it's people committing actual acts of violence, if it's people doing actually illegal things, then yes, that's a public order concern. But I don't want to see people discuss what we're going to discuss today. Check it off. You won't see it. If you don't want to see it, you shouldn't have to see it. We all agree on that.
I think we should allow people to say what they want, post what they want within the bounds of the law. But that's different from them being able to reach people who don't want to be reached. With
very much
content.
Rumble-esque, Rumble-esque principle.
So if that content is offensive, then to people, those people will simply stop using Twitter. So it's important to make Twitter as attractive as possible, and really that means not showing people content that they would find hateful or offensive or simple. Even frankly, content they would find boring is not good. So we don't even want them to see boring content.
Always the businessman, Elon is.
Unless we were talking about TikTok last night, and TikTok obviously does like a great job of making sure you are not bored.
Yeah, it does a little too good of a job making sure you're not bored, a la like a casino type environment. All right, let's get to the last one. But yeah, you don't want to see it? Don't see it in your preferences. And then let the people who want to have the discussions among adults have the discussion among adults.
I mean, it does like feel like ADD, but like next level. But TikTok does a great job of making you not bored. I mean, I do find some of the videos offensive, I think. But they're not boring. So the
dude, I'm making a shirt. Offensive but not boring.
How do we ensure people have content that they find entertaining and engaging and interesting, such that they want to keep using Twitter and use it more. So that's
okay.
You know, that's essential to the growth of the service.
I cut that clip too long.
At no point would I suggest that you have to be authenticated in order to use Twitter. It's just that it would just be a prioritizing of authenticated comments and actions on Twitter over unauthenticated in order to combat the sort of bots and trolls. And essentially, it needs to be much more expensive to have a troll army.
This is where I materially disagree with Elon on this. It needs to be much more expensive to have a troll army, so that only extremely powerful or politically connected political action committees could afford to have a bot army or a troll army, and that it looks more legitimate because it has gone through some additional authentication process at Twitter that only the rich can afford. I disagree with that. Making it more expensive might not actually resolve the problem. It might just exacerbate it, because all that you'll end up doing is having the campaigns with $1 billion be able to afford a bot army, a troll army that looks legitimate and that can actually influence things, if and only if, because they have the means to do it, but the rabble don't. So there's another solution to it, which we might discuss at another day. But right now, people,